Well, welcome to the ASUS Economist Board. I'm John Nelson of M&A, joined by Keith Prather of Armada. This is our December 2023 edition of videos that support to watch. How are you doing today, Keith?
I'm doing fantastic. Yeah, ready to have a little chat.
All right. Okay, so in this video, we're going to add some additional context to the models and the narrative that we put into the watch report. In this video, we're going to look and focus specifically on overall industrial production for manufacturing. And then for our subscribers, we're going to dive deeper into the subsectors of manufacturing in separate videos behind the login. We've got them covering transportation of goods, a construction sector, and an overall macroeconomic outlook. And since consumer spending is 70% of overall GDP, we'll take a look at retail sales in that overall macroeconomic outlook. If you're not a subscriber, sign up for a free trial through the webpage. There's my shameless plug. And with that shameless plug, we're going to go ahead and we'll take a look at industrial production for manufacturing. So let me go ahead and pull up the models. And if I can figure out how to use share here. There we go. Okay, so IPMAN is showing it's a similar story to what we talked about last month. And because you can see last month's model there on the right-hand side, a little bit less of an increase than what we were showing last time. So if anything, this is just a little bit flatter than what we showed. And then overall, the tail end of it's about 2 points lower over about 18 months. Now that's 18 months out. So it's well within the error of the model at that far out. But generally what we're saying is it's the same general story, but it's kind of a little bit of a downturn over the next couple months. And I'll go ahead and shift to the long, unless you want to talk something off of the short term, I'll go to the long term.
Yeah.
I know, Keith, you like to talk off of this long term slide.
Yeah, I mean, generally, we're seeing some echoes of what the models are telling us in some of the local PMI survey results. So the US and Canada, for instance, and the USMCA markets were showing contraction in manufacturing just in the latest month. And so we know that there's weakness out there. Looking forward over the next 6 months, manufacturers are slightly more optimistic about what's coming. But you and I have talked a lot, especially off camera, about the fact that there's a little bit of a difference between what the models are telling us, and again, we've come to the point now where we trust them, right? We trust with the data, we trust at least the inputs, and we know this month it's still showing this second half of the year and early 2025 weakness, which actually flies a little bit contrary to what we intuitively think is going to happen. I mean, what we intuitively think is happening is that most sectors are destocking right now. We've come through this inventory glut that kind of built over the last year and a half. And, as we go through the peak season and then we move into 2024, we think this destocking trend is pretty much over, where inventories are more balanced. So a new order for manufactured good, that manufacturer can't necessarily go and pull something off the shelf and go fill that order. They've got to go, restart an assembly line, which creates demand for, the raw material inputs, the energy inputs, the labor inputs, and all those functions really energize and really get that upper end of the supply chain going. And so that's what we think is going to happen, that by Q2 of next year, we get this reset. But again, you and I sit back and we look at the accuracy of these models. I mean, this particular model, let me look at my notes here. It is batting right now 98% accuracy 6 months out. And the 6 month view on this, shows it starting to downturn and down cycle. So I have to go with what the data is showing us at the moment and kind of forget my intuition for a moment. We like all these other inputs, but right now it's kind of saying, well, Keith, you're wrong. So I gotta go with it. But it is an interesting model. It is showing that interesting downturn. And John, if I were trying to explain maybe what the model's looking at, we would look at a global economy that right now has Europe and everything but recession. I mean, it's only got a couple labor sectors that are keeping it propped up. Asia generally in recession. South America is a mess. The Middle East is a mess. The US now is even kind of slowing down a little bit. And so, the model's reading all of that, and it sees probably what we should be paying attention to, which is a much weaker second half of next year than what we're probably anticipating.
Mhm. Okay. Well, let's take a look at some a little bit of the supply chain. We'll go back all the way to the raw materials at the very beginning, and here you go with primary metals. Now, primary metals is showing a little bit of an upturn, except when you get to the far back end of it, you start seeing that kind of a similar downturn, not too severe, but still a little bit of that downturn. And then you can see how it looks overall. Overall, this sector has kind of trended downward for years, but even that downward trend that we're looking at with primary metals puts it right on the overall 20 trend.
Yeah, and it's not surprising that this one's a little bit stronger. And I think we could talk about maybe some breaking news at the time we were recording these. By the time the videos are released, it won't be breaking, but there's the conflict happening in the Middle East right now, and Houthi rebels supported by Iran are taking shots at commercial ships, basically moving through the I think it's the Bab el Mandeb
Yes.
Strait. Yeah, and what's happened in the last 24 hours is that the biggest ocean liners in the world, the biggest cargo vessels, and the biggest tankers are basically not going to transit the Red Sea anymore, not using the Suez Canal. So you've got about 70 to 80% of the world's fleet basically saying we're not going to use the Suez Canal. So the impact of that, back when we had the Suez Canal choked off by an Evergreen ship that lost steering control, flipped sideways in 2021 in the canal, and it was down. I think the canal was down for about 10 days. The global economy lost $9 billion a day during that time, and it disrupted and shut off basically 10% of the global flow of goods. What it does effectively, it's kind of interesting, but it strips about 10 to 15% of the global capacity, maritime ship capacity, out of the global market. So as a shipper, if you think about that, it means a couple things for you. It means that your shipment's going to be delayed. It takes an additional 14 to 21 days to transit down the Cape of Good Hope if you're moving anything between Europe and Asia. So you're gonna reduce transit times or elongated transit times. Sorry. The other thing it does is it strips capacity out of the market, because while those ships are on the water longer, they're not hitting docks, getting turned, and getting back on the water. So the number of shipments out of many markets is going to be reduced. And again,
Right.
when we had the Evergreen ship sideways, we lost about 10% of the global capacity. So it means that your rates are going to go up. As capacity tightens, rates go up. So you've got those two factors to really kind of build into everything. And then the flip side of that is that also now we're going to have about 21 days of unexpected additional transit time added to any shipments that were already waterborne just over the last week or so. So you've got a little bit of a transit delay. And I only say that and only bring it up in the primary metals because right now most of the holiday cargo has already been moved. And so we've got a lot of that that's already in place for the peak season, but it would be the movement of primary metals getting ready for spring manufacturing activity that would be on the water right now, and that's getting disrupted. And so think about someone who's procuring steel out of parts of Asia or parts of Europe that would normally go through the Suez Canal, make a couple stops, and get connected to the U.S. Now no longer able to get a lot of that inbound freight. You're going to look at U.S. manufacturing of primary metals, and that lifts this chart. That possibly will give us what the model is showing us, maybe looking forward and able to see some of this disruption, a little increase in demand. But I would not be surprised, John, if the tail end of this curve doesn't shift and also show significant growth when we start to get new data in over the next 30 to 45 days.
Okay.
And so that's sort of my takeaway, kind of blending a lot of things together in with what the model is showing us. So no reason not to believe what the model is telling us, that we're going to have maybe one of the stronger primary metals environments that we've had since the beginning of the pandemic.
Wow. Okay, let's take a look a little bit closer then at fabricated metals. And you got kind of the same shape as primary. Pretty much it's a slight rise out for about a year or 10 months to a year, and then you start seeing that trailing off happening right there in that September, October timeframe of next year.
Yeah, and if you want to go to the next slide, I
Oh
think
yeah,
yeah,
sorry.
no worries, no worries. Yeah. And what's interesting about this too is it is showing again that same sort of front half strength and then trailing off in the back half, which is contrary. Like if you go look at current macroeconomic forecasts right now, John, they're showing Q1 and Q2 as maybe being contraction, maybe a mild soft landing. They're kind of calling it the Goldilocks recession, where technically it may fit the definition of a recession, but most industries won't feel it. But there will be some slowdown. And this is kind of saying that this kind of corroborates at least what we were saying about the supply chain. And that is that if a lot of supply chain managers are going to try and rebuild inventories after this sort of destocking period, that we might see some of that freight movement. You might see some of this demand, some of the fabricated metal demand in the first half of this year, followed by some softening in the back half. Whereas macroeconomic activity would show almost the opposite, where in the front half, demand is lower, even though we're building inventories, demand is a little bit weaker, followed by a little increase in demand in the second half, but would be feasting off of those inventories that we build in the first half of the year, which is why demand and why the curve is showing a bit of a dip in the second half. I know that's
Gotcha.
confusing, um, but many, many times we have seen, and I'm going to draw with my fingers, but we've seen many, many times supply chain and supply chain movement, freight movement, and macroeconomic movement kind of do a little bit of this, where they're kind of
Hmm.
crossing over. And most of the time, most normal economic cycles are going to move a little more like this, where they're kind of bouncing together. But we do get in these extreme inventory situations, either we've destocked too much or we've overstocked too much, and we do get these kind of counter cyclical movements. And we're kind of coming into a period where we got a little bit of that going on.
Gotcha. All right. Well, that concludes our look at overall industrial production for this month. Hope you've gotten something out of it. And as you can see, there's a lot of murk out there right now. It's a lot of mixed signals, but we're going to stand by our models for a little while longer and to look and see
Yeah,
what changes.
absolutely. And I can't emphasize more how important these events in the Red Sea are. They really are going to change procurement, sourcing, and what that looks like moving ahead. So there's a really good reason why everyone, if you're on a trial and you're not a subscriber, stay tuned, stick with us for another month as this transpires, because these models are going to adjust to what's going on globally. And if you are a subscriber, definitely tune in and stay close to us, because I think there's going to be a lot of stories to tell as we see the news and as these developments kind of transpire. So,
All
okay,
right. Take care.
thanks everybody. Appreciate it. Bye bye.